Breaking.
Hello and welcome to Beyond 100 Days this Friday. I am Abosedi Adeniwadremi. You can join the conversation on X via TVC News NG and use the hashtag Beyond 100 Days. After about 3 months, the Nigerian Correctional Service has released more photos of the inmates who escaped from the Medium Security Custodial Center in Suleja, Niger State. About 119 inmates fled from the correctional center in April when rainfall destroyed walls of the correctional facility. 18 of the inmates were captured in June, and identities of 31 others were disclosed by the service just last night. The Minister of Interior, Olubunmi Tunji-Ojo, in his visit after the incident, hinted that the federal government is considering relocating the facility. Let's now look at another matter, and it's the continuous war against drugs. Operatives of the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency have seized another batch of 7 containers of codeine syrup worth about 9.8 billion naira at the on-air ports. This development comes less than 3 weeks after it seized more than 6,000 cartons of the same product at Port Harcourt Port Complex in Rivers State. In a statement, the agency's Director of Media and Advocacy, Femi Babafemi, said the feat was achieved following credible intelligence and months of diligent tracking of the consignments from their port of departure. Other items in the container include 70 cartons of chili cutters and 55 cartons of Haragra tablets weighing 1,100 kilograms. Now to the main issue we are discussing today. 70,000 naira is now the new minimum wage in Nigeria after months of intense meetings. The federal government and organized labor agreed on the aforementioned figure after the back and forth on the 250,000 naira proposed by organized labor. Now, the president will send the new minimum wage figure to the National Assembly for it to be passed into law. This figure will be reviewed every 3 years. So that's the message coming from the president, Bola Tinubu. Will the workers in Nigeria now enjoy a better standard of living? This and many more questions my guest will be answering on the program today. And with me in the studio is lawyer and development consultant Titi Lokwe Anifowoshe. Good to have you here.
Good evening. It's good to be here too.
Indeed. And, I was just looking back at, an interview granted, TVC News in June. And in that interview, one point he made was that the negotiation should actually be for the sake of Nigerians.
True.
Now we've agreed on 70,000 naira. Does it fit into that mold?
Yes, I think it does. We must commend the president for coming in. I think this is the 6th time Nigeria will be having a review of minimum wage, but the first time the president would be taking the role of the chief negotiator. So I think we should applaud President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for expediting the process. It's a win for everyone, not just for TUC, NLC, private sector or governors, but for Nigerians as a whole. It's 133% increase from what we had before. So I think it's a win for everyone.
And the review process will now be done every 3 years. Do you consider that a win or a miss?
A big one, as opposed to 5 years. So what it means is that within 3 years, with consideration of the realities of our economy, it will be easier for them to come together again, sit, make adjustments. I mean, it's a win for everyone. 3 years, a big win for everyone.
Just yesterday, I was speaking with the NECA Director General, and he said something about 3 years, it could just drag on and on. You are unable to agree. By the time you look up and, you're turning down again, it's already another 3 years when a new one should be initiated. Meanwhile, you're still talking, haggling over the old one.
Well, historically, this is almost the fastest negotiation we've had. So I think the leadership that concluded that, okay, let's do this thing every 3 years. Let's also not forget that it's not just a pronouncement. We have a law backing this pronouncement. So 3 years to consider the reality of a nation is actually in the interest of the people. So I think it's beautiful.
All right. And, this agreement is expected to be binding on all.
Yes.
Whether all employers and, of course, employees, whether employed by government or employed by the private sector. Do you have absolute confidence that every employer of labor will be able to pay this new wage?
Okay. Will be able to pay the minimum wage, or will be willing to pay the minimum wage, considering the figures right now. I have this notion that if some states are a private company, they would have folded up by now. So I believe that it's not about being able to pay, but being willing to pay. Let's take it back a little. In the first 4 months of this year, state government have received about 2 trillion from the federal government. FAC allocation has doubled or tripled since the removal of fuel subsidy, minus IGR, minus the 13% derivation. So it is no longer a question of, we can't do it. It's about the reality on ground. Nigerians are going through a lot. The federal government have over and over again introduced palliatives, introduced this and introduced that. And don't also forget that the private sector were one of the first set of people who said, yes, we could do 62,000, if you remember. So I think that it is necessary for all hands to be on deck to ensure that workers derive the best from their labor. So it's not about we can do it, but it's about we should do it, we're willing to work towards it. So yes, I believe that we can get it done.
You mentioned earlier that some states, if they were to be private companies, they probably would have folded up. And a number of states in Nigeria are actually considered civil servant states. So many workers enrolled in a government employ, and then you wonder what the level of productivity is, what the state generates, and their ability to actually function without this federal allocation in some cases. So how do you feel that these states can get to that point where they can actually afford this? Because I hear some people are still struggling with 18,000 naira. That's baffling.
I think systematically, we aren't talking so much about restructuring, but I think that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is deliberate about restructuring. A few weeks ago, we had autonomy for the local government. So right now, it's not a question of everyone is looking towards the state government within the state to do something. It means that the local government would be able to execute projects without undue influence. So I think that indeed some states are unable to match up with what they ought to do. So we need to get serious. We need to make every state economically viable. And it's not a question of, no, we don't have it. Nigeria is a huge nation with so many mineral resources. It's about, you need to get it done. And let's also not forget that Edo State, for example, had been paying 70,000 naira to its workers before today. So what it means, as I said earlier, is the will and the ability for the state government to work together. I also want to note that rather than fashioning all of these palliatives through the state government, we can take a cue from what happened in Kwara in 2020 during the COVID-19, when the state government worked with civil societies and NGOs in the disbursement of this. So the federal government can look at a way to ensure that these things are not fashioned through the state government alone, that the average Nigerian gets something out of all of this good news, the CNG buses, the this, the that, on the news good, but maybe people aren't getting it. However, I think that it is time for the state to take a cue from the willingness of the president to get things done for the people.
And now that there's autonomy for the local government, perhaps also the local government can also get some directly and pass on to the people. It's also important to note the position of the Nigeria Governors Forum. While the negotiation was on, they said specifically that compelling states to pay 62,000 naira when the negotiation was still on 62, may lead to about 40% retrenchment of workers. Now that we have agreed on a figure that is not just 62, but even 8,000 naira higher than that, don't you think, are you worried, are you concerned that, the risk of retrenchment might even be higher?
Well, it's a fact devoid of fallacy that the civil service in Nigeria, across FG, local government, states, are some of the most inefficient. I think that indeed retrenchment may take place, but rather than making it about retrenchment, I think we should focus on productivity. Let's digitalize the civil society, the civil service. Let's digitalize it. Let's know how many workers do we have? Who are the ghost workers? I'm so sure that, if you remember, before the president came up with this 70,000 minimum wage, the first thing he did was to direct the Minister of Finance to go back to the books. Let's see how tenable it is. So I think if state governments can also go back to the drawing table to look at their books, review the civil service within your state. Let's know those who are working, those who are not working. We would have some changes. We will have some money to save, and then we'll be able to distribute it evenly. And then it's not about retrenchment. People in Nigeria today on the streets are not scared to work, but they just want their remuneration to be commensurate with their labor. So I think people are ready to do what it takes legitimately to get paid what they ought to be paid. So the talks about retrenchment, it's okay, but start working.
And when retrenchment comes in, then you also have labor to contend with.
Exactly.
Because labor will tell you, you can't lay people off. They need to be gainfully employed and all of that.
But I'm certain that if labor sees the evidence, clear books, that these are the people who have been resuming work 28 days out of 30 days, thereabout, I'm so sure labor is reasonable. Labor is reasonable. Everyone wants what is best for the nation, but we can't continue to pay for some people who are in their houses languishing around while some people are suffering. So it's not just about retrenchment. Retrenchment, I think, is just for sentiment's sake. I think what we need to do is to increase the productivity of our civil service.
Hopefully we'll get to talk about that productivity as the conversation continues. But then the president is expected to present this figure to the National Assembly. It will be legislated upon and such that, it becomes a law binding on all. Do you perceive that the National Assembly could want to tinker with the figure, because, of course, now it's going back to them. It has to pass through them. Do you see them do that?
I do not think so, because the National Assembly as a representation of people, average Nigerians, the words on the streets is clear. They do not want to see the wrath of the people. So I think that this 70,000 has so far gotten the applause of Nigerians. So I do not think they would dare to play with the figure. So it's almost the fastest we've had so far. It's almost the fastest. So I think they won't try to do that.
But playing with the figures could be either ways. It could either go up or...
Let's also not forget that minimum wage is the barest minimum, and states are subject to reviewing upwards. So 70,000 naira for a start, level 7, 8, oh my God, it's a lot.
The consequential adjustments, is another critical matter that needs to be looked into.
Which can be negotiated. I mean, the law is beautiful. So the law is not saying, the law is not holding anybody by their neck. Consequential can be amended, can be reviewed within the state. So I think what the governors can do is now to sit down with the NLC, TVC, and what have you, and try to look at what is feasible in these states. I think it's not the end. I think there will be so much more negotiations, but for the sake of the people, we'll make an headway.
All right, then. Let's take a moment to watch this report put together by our State House correspondent, Femi Akonde, on the deliberations and the agreement as reached on Thursday about this new national minimum wage of 70,000 naira.
3 months after the expiration of the previous national minimum wage, a new one has been agreed between the federal government and organized private sector. This new minimum wage of 70,000 naira comes 1 month after the 37-member tripartite committee inaugurated by President Bola Tinubu submitted its report. After meeting the president for the second time, an agreement was reached, and with a caveat of negotiating a wage increase every 3 years.
We are taking this with mixed feeling because of the situation of the economy, but we have to move ahead. Despite the situation, and the negotiation can linger, coming from 62 to 70, and then with the promise that We'll come back soon.
We from organized labor, we have been pushing that the issue of 5 years review is too much, that a lot of economic indices may have changed. The next review will be 3 years, and after that pronouncement, we from labor just has been said that, well, we have received what the president has promised.
Beyond the wage increase, President Bola Tinubu made some concessions on behalf of the federal government. He directed that all contentious issues with the Non-Academic Staff Union of Universities and the Senior Staff Association of Nigerian Universities be resolved. The federal government will also expedite measures to reduce the impact of economic reforms on citizens.
More money is going to go into the acquisition of more buses, the CNG buses. Nigeria is going to be more CNG compliant, according to the president.
He promised and asked that the Minister of Finance, coordinating economy and budget and the economic planning should make sure that they go back to books, because he has the discretion.
Assembly and transmitted back to President Bola Tinubu before they can all enjoy the pay rise. Femi Akonde, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us. We're still talking about the minimum wage issue, and Tisilope Anefoshi, lawyer and development consultant, is still with me in the studio. In that report, the NLC president, was saying something about they had to accept, considering the situation of the economy and the way things are. Can this figure actually guarantee better living standards for Nigerians?
Yes, I believe so. I believe the figure, 70,000 naira is a lot of money. And let's not forget, 70,000 is the minimum. It's a bare minimum. If someone steals 50,000 naira from me right now, I'm definitely going to go gaga. Yeah, so I believe that, yes, 70,000 naira is not the only amount of money workers take home at the end of the month. Yeah.
What other amounts do they take home?
70,000 naira is not the only
Not the
amount.
only. Okay, so what other amounts do they take home? Or do you assume they take home?
They take allowances. They are allowances for workers. And then if for a new entry civil servant, 70,000 is what I get as my wage. There are other allowances that workers get. So, and also for private sector, they're definitely going to make some amendments, some increase. So I think it's uhuru for workers like myself. It's uhuru for us.
All right. And when the discussion was on, there were concerns about the impact this could have on the market. Already food inflation is at an extremely high rate, and then there's also that concern about what market men and women do. The moment they hear there's an increment, just rest assured that prices have automatically gone up, which is not meant to be so.
I think this is where the federal government, the media houses, and everyone have to work on, because we need to increase our enlightenment to Nigerians on the implication of this. The fact that it's 70,000 naira minimum wage does not mean money is going to be flying around. I believe that there is a great need for us to increase our patriotism. To love Nigeria means that you need to care about the other person beside you, not just your family. To love Nigeria means that you should be reasonable enough to ensure that you aren't inflicting suffering by being greedy, by being immoral, to your fellow Nigerians. To love Nigeria also means that you need to ensure that Nigeria is safe for every other person. So yes, I know that there is a possibility that our traders want to, engage in hiking prices, but I believe that this is just the beginning. The way the news of the increase has gone around would also ensure that everyone gets the information that, hey, it doesn't mean that the money is everywhere. We owe each other a duty of care.
And talking about productivity, which you mentioned earlier, how can authorities, states, local governments ensure productivity among staff to ensure that we are able to make the most of available resources and time, and all of that?
I think we need to start from digitalization. First, let's even know how many civil servants do we have across board? How many civil servants have been recorded to resume frequently? How many civil servants are on leave? How many of them are we paying? I think when we start with that, then we now look at it from the angle of what result have we been getting from this department, from that department, from that department. I think states have gone through the process of identifying ghost workers. We did that in Kwara quite recently. I think something like that happened in Kaduna a few years ago. So I believe that if we kickstart productivity, checking productivity commensurate with how much each parastatal, each ministry or agency, each ministry is spending, we'll be able to assuage the profit and loss. I also believe that it's important for us to see government or governance or civil service, not just from the angle of Father Christmas. Just like I mentioned earlier about how if states were like private companies, we'll be discussing merger and acquisition right now. I think that we should also see civil service in that directive of, okay, how much are we putting in and how much are we getting out of it? I also think that it is important for us to invest heavily in training and retraining our staff, for them to know that, hey, you are in this office not because you are from this state or that state. You are in this office because you owe your state, your local government, the federal government a duty of development for the nation. I think that if we can work on that patriotism, digitalization, and what have you, we'll get there.
And what to think about how President Bola Tinubu has actually handled this matter? You know, at some point he had to call for wider consultations to reach a figure that was workable.
I think, as I said it earlier, it's the first time the president is taking the seat as a chief negotiator. It's the first time. I think we aren't talking about that as much as we should. It shows a high level of exemplary leadership. People are talking about it on the streets. We have 3 ministers. Is it 3 or 4 ministers on the table, and how many governors with members from the TUC, NLC, but the president himself decided to sit and, listen directly, not through his agents, to the complaints and the concerns of this committee. And then you would also notice that since he came in, it was faster to arrive at a solution. And I'm also happy with the comments of the NLC president. So it's not a question of undue influence on what have you. It's a reality. It's what can work for the country at the moment. So I salute President Bola Ahmed Tinubu for this. I salute him for all of what he's been doing. And I believe that we are going to get there very soon.
Well, the leadership of the organized labor met earlier today. I do not know if the meeting is over. They hope to discuss what happened yesterday and reach a deal.
You would also notice, sorry, that
going forward,
the language changed, yes, as opposed to what we had last month with what the chairperson, the NLC is, the way he's speaking now. It's a change. So I think it's good leadership.
All right. And also, the government agreed to pay the withheld salaries of NASU and SANU,
yeah, very well,
staff, and, to ensure stability in the education sector. So we should be expecting no strikes.
Yes, and then the CNG buses.
The CNG buses also.
I think that's going to be 720, 100-seater each. That's a lot. I think we're getting there. I'm very excited. I'm very excited about the takeaway. So now it's a win-win for everyone, the government, NLC, and the Nigerian people.
All right, then. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, lawyer and development consultant, Titi Lokwe and Ifuoshi. Thank you so much for your time and contributions on the program.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's our program today. We thank you very much for being a part of it. Do watch a repeat broadcast at midnight and at 6 a.m. I am Abosede Adeniran Aderemi. Do have a fantastic weekend.